Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we are going to talk specifically about Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen, and we are going to talk about the Moog. All right. So first of all, let's talk about Schneider's Dragonlance. This is new. This is extremely exciting. So for a long time, I think we kind of suffered under Hickman Weiss Dragonlance, right? So what was Hickman Weiss Dragonlance? It was 190 novels. There were 190 novels of Dragonlance. That's too many, right? And I think Hickman and Weiss did some good jobs of establishing a D&D canon setting, right? Which is Dragonlance, Kryn, Continent Ancillon, and then areas Solamnia, Abyssinia, Kendermore, lots, right? But Schneider's new Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen does something that we really haven't seen before in Dungeons and Dragons, which is coming and taking and doing a full hotel restoration, right? And saying, here we have this crusty old setting. Does it matter? And this is a huge question now, right? Because Karator, Rokugan, Oriental Adventures, almost if I could lay a line right now on in Vegas, if those adventures would come back, if those worlds would ever come back, I would take whatever odds they had, I think, right? Because they ain't coming back. They are not coming back, right? So what I want to talk about today with Schneider's Dragonlance is the Moog question, okay? What is the Moog question? Moogh. It's a mnemonic. So Tiamat comes to Kryn, okay? Who joins her immediately? Who joins under her evil banner, right? Well, the Moog, the Minotaurs, the Orcs, the Ogres, the Goblins, and the Hobgoblins, right? They all immediately join under her banner, right? Now, here's where it gets interesting, right? Orc is specifically an incredibly problematic species within American fantasy, right? The first was, it came under Tolkien, and people said, hey, we believe that when he's talking about orc, he's talking about a specific race of humans, right? And that became incredibly problematic, right? And people were like, hey, maybe we shouldn't be celebrating Tolkien's work as much as it is. And then that same problem echoed down to Dungeons and Dragons, saying, hey, when some of these old books were written, there was a problem, right? We were not really isolating fantasy species from human races, right? And so huge problem, right? And this is the point. Dungeons and Dragons, real Dungeons and Dragons, Hasbro Dungeons and Dragons wants to fix this. And they're saying constantly, no hate speech connected to D&D. You cannot use D&D for your prejudices, right? And then over on on the orc side, on the open role-playing creatives, they're like, let's take the most problematic species ever and let's totally make that our banner. You're like, right. So one, is it a problem, right? So one, I do think Schneider misstepped, and it might have been better if he had just put the Minotaurs, the Ogres, right? The Goblins and the Hobgoblins, which I don't think there's been any, people aren't saying, hey, those are problematic species, right? Generally, there might be, and even if there are, right, those are some exception conversations rather than main broad conversations, right? So that's one of the things that is interesting there. So Schneider isn't perfect, right? And I think is one of the things too that we're seeing is when you say, I want to create an inclusive world, it's hard. It's hard to do that, right? There are missteps along the way, right? I think it was important when Tiamat came in, it was important to explain that within Dragonlance, there were going to be groups, right, who immediately joined. And I think it seems appropriate. The Minotaurs, the Goblins, the Hobgoblins, and the Ogres joined. I don't think, honestly at this point, I think D&D may want to just start to leave the orcs out completely, right? And just do we need them? Is there a need? We have so many monsters in the monster guide that don't carry these problems, right? And so I think this was a misstep on Schneider's part, but I think his work has far surpassed anything Hickman and Weiss has ever done. All that's my humble opinion, and I am very eager to hear your humble opinion. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.